All right, I think you're all set.
Great. Well, welcome and thank you for joining our event today. I'm Kelly Wellman, Sustainability Director at Texas A&M University. I also serve on the executive committee of TRACS, which is the Texas Regional Alliance for Campus Sustainability. And as we've all been experiencing over the last several weeks, our events haven't gone quite as we anticipated, and that includes our having to cancel the annual TRACS Summit down in South Padre Island. So the TRACS higher education institutions have been working collaboratively and furiously over the last couple of weeks to provide virtual programming Earth events so that we can all support and access one another. And today we're going to be hearing a talk by Joey Shea. Let's start the climate take back. But before we do that, I do want to express my appreciation to Marianella Franklin at UT Rio Grande Valley for all the work they did in planning for our TRACS Summit and then quickly pivoting and having to cancel the event. But Marianella was instrumental in getting great keynotes such as Interface to be part of that event. And we're appreciative of Interface today being able to continue to honor that commitment and still provide us access to your wonderful knowledge. So I want to also recognize the TRACS sponsors, which are the Dallas County Community College District, as well as EarthX. A lot of great EarthX events happening. If you haven't already looked that up, check their schedule out online and drop into things that pique your interest. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Joey Shea. Joey Shea joined Interface in 2018 as part of the customer experience team to bring the commitments and values of Interface to life through unique, immersive experiences for Interface customers. Now, as manager of mission activation, he relies on his background in the environmental, nonprofit, and advocacy sector to share how Interface connects successful business practices to deeper environmental responsibility. Joey values involved with environmental and civic advocacy community in Atlanta and has served in a leadership role on Generation Green, the Georgia Conservancy's Young Professionals Board, and as a member of the Atlanta Regional Commission's Millennial Advisory Board. He currently serves on the advisory board of the Lifecycle Building Center, Atlanta's leading building material reuse nonprofit, and as a board member of Chattahoochee Now, an organization dedicated to revitalizing and unlocking the potential of the Chattahoochee River that flows through North Georgia. Joey graduated summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa from Emory University and is a proud graduate of the Atlanta Regional Commission's Regional Leadership Institute in 2016. Please help me welcome Joey Shea.
Thank you, Kelly. Man, I'm going to need to shorten that bio. First of all, kudos on getting the name of our local river right in North Georgia, Chattahoochee. Thank you all so much for joining us. You know, Interface is really proud and honored to be asked to speak at events with leaders like yourselves. Obviously, the higher ed community is an area or a sector that really provides a level of leadership, ambition, and vision to the sustainability conversation for this country, and I would say globally, that we're really glad to always be a part of and in some way, you know, potentially help to influence. So before I flip over to my presentation here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see. I'll just show you all my contact information. If anybody wants to reach out to me after this presentation for any reason, feel free. We'd always, you know, always want to stay in touch and excited to continue this conversation. Throughout the presentation here, if you have any clarifying questions or anything that you want to just hop in with, Kelly is going to help me monitor the chat. And she'll interrupt me if there's anything that is kind of a timely question. Otherwise, we'll wait to the end to kind of get into some discussion. Before I go into the presentation, I want to mention that we do have some local Interface folks also with us on the call. So I want to highlight them just because, you know, they're great resources for you in your market. I'm typically based in Atlanta. I'm waiting out quarantine with my family here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which is why I have my giant Tar Heels cup, by the way. So sorry if that's any kind of rivalry issue for anybody. Glad we got Mac Brown back, by the way. We've got Ford Savage, who is out of the San Antonio market. I believe we've got Amy Starnes with us from Dallas. Oh, here we go. Thank you. And then we've got two of our sales leaders, Danny Earhart, based out of Houston, and Rick Van Halligan, also with us. And he oversees North Texas and over into Louisiana. I think we might even have Anne-Marie Desotos from Louisiana with us. So please make sure that they're going to just introduce themselves in the chat. They'll just drop their contact information in there. Please feel free to connect with them as well. So this presentation is really all about how businesses and institutions can take action on climate, and it is a framework for very simply reversing global warming. We are really, thrilled and honored and excited to be able to share it. But I just want to take a moment to recognize that there are some acute concerns that we all have right now around the pandemic, and I just personally feel honored and blessed to believe in the work that I do at a time when we're all thinking, and kind of revisiting our priorities and what matters to us. But I also want to say, I hope that none of this message comes off as belittling the very real challenges that we are all facing with kind of the shelter-in-place orders and the kind of threat to public health that we're all surrounded by. So I think that this is a time when we need to really take this kind of big pause moment and think about how we are acting for the planet, for each other, and for the future that we want. And for me, climate change is a huge part of that. But I, again, just don't want to minimize the impacts of, the kind of economic issues that we're dealing with, and obviously the public health issues that we're dealing with now. So just please, recognize that we take that very seriously. Like any good CEU, I need to start by just reading off a couple of things from the slides, so bear with me for 2 slides here. Interface is a registered provider with the American Institute of Architects and IDCEC Continuing Education Systems. Credit earned upon completion of this program will be reported to CES records for AIA members, and certificates of completion for non-AIA or IIDA members are available upon request. This is also a GBCI eligible CEU. The course number, we can get that to you. And it's obviously self-reporting. We are using CEU events to track any credit that anybody wants. So I know a number of you got links from your universities, from TRACS, and so you had the meeting invitation, which is all great. If you want to get CEU credit for this program, though, you will need to register at ceuevents.com/1F6D. You just basically put in your name and email address and then your kind of accreditation numbers, and then you'll be automatically in the system, and I'll mark you as attended, and you will get your certificate of completion. So please remember, if you do want credit, you got to go through this very little brief registration process. Learning objectives for this session. We're going to define embodied carbon, and we're going to be able to talk about it with suppliers. We're also going to talk about why that's such an important conversation right now. We're going to give examples of each of the 4 pillars of the climate take back framework, and we're going to kind of explore some specific opportunities to engage with those pillars. This is where, creativity and your ingenuity can really come out. And what I think is really special about this presentation is we have a real focus in the framework on the kind of optimism and the mindset of making change, because we believe that without that, it's not possible. And finally, we're going to try to tie this all in a bow by understanding carbon smart building beyond operational efficiency. Not because that's not important, but because, as you'll see, I think it is only one portion of the problem. So this is the first slide, and I have to say I really love it. When I first saw this as I got started here, I knew I was in the right place, because I like to rephrase this as if humanity changed the climate by mistake, imagine what we can do with intent. If we recognize that nobody set out to warm the planet, it wasn't a goal, right? Then we have to kind of at once respect the impact that we have had and admire our own, power, right? But also recognize that we have a real potential to go the other direction if we choose to. And we don't know what it would be like to have kind of a global mission statement around acting on climate. And I think hopefully what we're seeing even within this pandemic is that when we choose to, we can move really fast. And it would be fascinating to see if we could move this fast in a period of months on some of the big issues that face us. And I think that this opening kind of commentary invites us into that imagination and into that creative space, which is, again, something that we think is really crucial to kind of facing climate change and facing global environmental issues. Particularly relevant these days, but a really important way that we level set within this conversation is, as much as you can probably already tell that I'm I'm a pretty rabid environmentalist. This is not just a Save the Frogs campaign. This is a Save the Humans campaign, right? And what we are realizing, and what the WHO and the CDC and other major health organizations have said for 10, 15, sometimes more years, is that climate change is the greatest threat to human health in the 21st century. And the reason for that is that it acts as what the military calls a threat multiplier. So if you think about any potential public health issue, and we'll say air pollution is where we're focused now, because I know we've got some folks from some big Texas cities that deal with this, right? If you have a higher prevalence of asthma in your children because of all the emissions from cars and buildings and smokestacks in your area, that's a problem, and it can be a little bit of a quality of life issue. But especially now today, we are realizing that we have actually expanded the definition of vulnerable populations when it comes to something like a global pandemic. And now those people are at much greater risk than they typically otherwise would be, with an otherwise healthy immune system, young, relatively in shape, whatever it is. So I think it's really important that we understand that the mechanisms that are driving climate change and driving rising sea levels and driving CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere are having an impact and an effect on human health now today, right? And it is really especially important that we kind of grapple with that and see it as one of our motivations to taking action in this context of the pandemic. I'm not going to spend too much longer on the slide, because I think especially within the higher ed community, this is a conversation that is probably not new for many of you. But I just wanted to stress that, we talk about this because it matters for humans now. It's not all a theoretical what happens in 40 years problem, right? More preamble. I promise we're going to get to the plan. A few years ago, Net Impact did a study of 400 climate experts and asked them this very simple question: do you believe we can take back our climate and make a climate fit for life? And I bet that even on this call, of people who really know what they're talking about and think about this fairly frequently, not many of you would have guessed that 95% of them said yes. It would be difficult, but it is possible. It is crucial to understand that in this community and in the emerging professionals and the kind of next generation of business leaders, so this is 18 to 35-year-old professionals, 91% of them agreed, yes, it is possible to take back our climate, which means to reverse this problem of global warming, which means to get our carbon emissions not just under control, but actually to fix the problem, to get closer to, say, 350 ppm, right, instead of 440 or wherever we are now. And this level of belief is not something that enters our narrative about climate change very frequently, right? But it is a crucial reality to understand. Both young professionals and kind of seasoned climate experts really believe that this is possible. Now, why do they believe that it's possible? Well, for the climate experts, overwhelmingly, they said because we have everything we need. I guarantee you can imagine either yourself or somebody in your life right now who just is like tearing their hair out saying, we know what we have to do. It's not that hard. We've done the research. We know what it would take, right? And that's crucial because we have kind of technical know-how that we can rely on and we can lean on. But young professionals said overwhelmingly, almost half of them said because we believe in humanity. Now, easy to make fun of the way that this is phrased. Sounds very naive, sounds very young. And I put myself in this category, right? So I can make fun of myself and my peers a little bit. But the reality is this: you can have all the technical know-how in the world, but if that is accompanied by cynicism and fatalism, you're not going to make progress. And similarly, you can have all the belief and hope in the world, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to make progress, right? So these two things together, young professionals who just have a hopeful outlook and want to stay optimistic about human beings in the world, and seasoned professionals who know what it would take to move markets, to move economies, to move politics, to move social structures, to move local action in a way that would benefit the planet. Those two things together really give us the power to make change when it comes to global warming, when it comes to climate issues. The biggest obstacle that faces this kind of action is easily categorized as business as usual. Excuse me, scoot back a little. And I think this makes sense. You're going to see on the right side of the screen here, there are some specific responses to this question: what would make climate take back impossible? And you can also see how, whether it's about political will, whether it's about kind of standard operating procedure in business, it makes sense that there's this real challenge with the inertia and the momentum that we are all used to, right? It is going to take a lot of effort for us to change our behaviors from most of the behaviors that we're used to, or even some of them. And those of you that are in the facilities management space or the construction and design space, like Interface and most of the customers that I speak with, you're going to feel this for sure, right? We've all run into people in our industry who are really hard to move off of just what they've done for the last 10 to 15 years, okay? And that's not always bad, right? There's benefits to the kind of business as usual, right? That's why it exists. It's expedient, it's familiar. But when it comes to something as big as climate change, it gets in the way more and more and more. And we start to see there's this lack of imagination and this lack of energy to doing something different. So where do we start, right? How do we get started on this? We believe that change starts in the mind. So we think that words like courage and positivity and feelings like belief and hope are crucial to taking action on climate, and they are crucial to a framework that is going to take this seriously and make real progress. Okay. So let's talk about the plan. We've finally arrived. It only took me 10 minutes. So there are 4 pillars to the climate take back plan: live zero, love carbon, let nature cool, and lead the industrial revolution. This is a flexible framework that in theory should be able to be applied to any business, right? Live zero I see as dedication. It is about doing your homework. It is about making sure that you have taken care of all the efficiency that you can come up with to reduce your impact on the environment and on the climate. And to do that as a baseline, as a jumping off point for the rest of the work and the rest of the framework. So love carbon is actually where I'm going to spend more time because it's a little provocative. It seems a little counterintuitive. We typically think of carbon as the problem when it comes to climate change, and it is very kind of in a very concrete way. But that also presents some real opportunity for us to act. Let nature cool is about humility, where love carbon is about innovation and ingenuity. Let nature cool is a recognition that no matter how good we get at this, we are never going to be as good as all the world's forests and oceans and plants and wetlands and natural systems, right? And then lead the industrial revolution is audacity, it's boldness, and it's the vision that business could become an engine for positive change rather than a driver of negative impact, and one that only has the ambition to try to reduce that negativity, right? So let's start with Live Zero. This is a picture of a bubble. These are the goals that are associated with Live Zero, and these are the things that you're probably going to be most familiar with. If you think about large institutional sustainability goals, there's usually a 100 or a 0 involved in there somewhere, right? 100% renewable energy or clean energy, 0 waste to landfill, 0 pollution, whatever that means. It could be as concrete and kind of straightforward as resource efficient transportation. In higher ed communities, I know there's a huge amount of attention, and I'm grateful for it, paid to local food and seasonal food, because we know that that's a huge element of our carbon footprints, right? And this is the stuff that, again, just kind of makes the most sense. But the reason that I think this is so important to include in the plan is that if you don't do this, everything else in the climate take back framework gets a lot harder, right? You have to innovate that much more. You have to invest that much more if you haven't made yourself as efficient and you haven't found a way to kind of live as lightly as possible or operate as lightly as possible on the earth. One example of this pillar is the RE100. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's not 100 companies, but it is a commitment for companies to reach 100% renewable energy. And the commitments specifically vary. They might have a different year target. They may be a slightly different scope within the business. But the point is, there's real movement and energy around getting to a clean energy economy and changing the demand on the grid. I actually love that Bank of America in particular is on this slide because I think it represents kind of a big money movement away from carbon intensive or climate damaging industries and investment. I'm sure that many of you have dealt with students on your campuses. Many of you may be students on campuses that are really interested in the divestment movement and changing university endowments to move away from fossil fuel support. Really important, noble goal, and I would say is a facet of that kind of big financial institution money movement away from fossil fuels or away from non-renewable industries and into more climate resilient, less physically vulnerable businesses and sectors. So I think it's really important that they're included here as well. So love carbon is the next pillar. And like I said, this is where I'm going to spend a little bit more time. The basic premise of this pillar is simply put, we just need to kind of reorient our relationship with carbon as a molecule and stop thinking about it as a waste product that is only doing damage and start seeing it as a resource that we can actually build with. We will then be able to associate value and worth with something that typically we're only seeing as damaging, right? So how would this actually work? Well, it means that we need to get very serious about industrial processes that capture carbon. Now, that could look like the machines that you see at the bottom of the screen here. I like to make the joke, it's like big vacuums in the sky, and then you do something chemically with the CO2. Not typically a very economical or scalable technique right now, but the principle is the same even if you're using natural derived materials from something that used to be alive and going through photosynthesis, because photosynthesis is fixing carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in a solid state. And if we can find a way to convert that into step 2, usable, durable carbon, then we can find a way to create building blocks out of something that we typically see as the kind of the world's most damaging waste product, if in carbon dioxide, right? It's my language, it's not really official. I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but I'll stick with it for now. So usable, durable carbon, how do we create products that actually act as carbon sinks, right? And then very, very crucially, last step on just this slide, reutilization. How do we keep things in the technical loop? How do we keep things in a closed loop manufacturing process? Because no matter how efficient we get and how successful we become at fixing carbon out of the atmosphere and then building stuff with it, if we turn around and burn it or let it rot in a landfill, we've undone all of that important work, right? So why is this important to the built environment specifically? Well, in our community of customers and stakeholders is really focused on construction and design. In the next 30 years, we're going to build a lot of new buildings. And up until 2060, there's new data out that is saying that globally, a new New York City, in terms of building square footage, will be constructed every month from now until 2060. Now, that's a huge number. It's fascinating to think about the global trends associated with that because it's actually going to be construction that moves generally south in the world. So we're going to start in what is still typically the kind of highest developed and richest nations. But by 2060, there's going to be what are now emerging economies that are going to have incredibly high demand for new construction. Why is this so important? Well, over the next 30 years, we are in a critical window for climate action. Many people would even say we're in a critical window for the next 10, and we've been in a critical window for probably 20, right? I support all of that, but the reality is for the next 30 years, we need to think very, very hard about our raw carbon emissions. And what this slide is showing us is that all of the good work that we've done around building efficiency and operational efficiency and high performance building codes and green building, if it is just focused on the energy use once you turn the building on, you've already missed about half the problem. And again, if you think about this time frame, right? being critical to climate action, you have to respect that that upfront carbon cost, which is the amount of carbon emissions associated with just making the materials that we build with. So the concrete and the steel and the finishes and the furniture and the window glazing and all that stuff, all the raw materials, however that's extracted, however it's processed, however it's assembled, however it's transported, all of that comes with a carbon footprint. And when we start to break down the carbon footprint of a building to include that embodied carbon piece, we see that in a 30-year time horizon, new construction is going to be split 50-50 basically. This is huge, right? Because it means that we need to think very hard about how conversations like this, carbon capture, durable carbon, and reutilization relate to the reality that we have a serious kind of thing to address, right, when it comes to the built environment. So how do we take action on that? Well, environmental product declarations, which are a kind of very common mechanism of transparency in the building products sphere, do actually have information on what's called global warming potential, which is the carbon footprint of that product. Now, it is generally buried on like page 14. It is going to be hard to find, and you kind of have to know how to read it. And so what the industry is starting to take very seriously is making that data, because it is becoming so clear how important it is and that it is kind of a common denominator when it comes to the sustainability conversation in the built environment. We're starting to find ways to plot that really easily and digestibly kind of side by side. So the point of this slide is to share that all of the data here actually comes from publicly available published data, right? That is third-party verified, part of an EPD, and it has been stacked next to each other across manufacturers and across product lines so that we can imagine what it would be like to have this level of transparency around carbon footprint for every kind of building product that we specify or ask for, right? And it is in the direction of the transparency that we have around foods and ingredients, right? But here's the really revolutionary part of Love Carbon. A few years ago, this product was developed, which actually found a way to store more carbon in the body of its materials than was emitted in the entire production process. And so what that means is, instead of competing to see how small this bar could be, we've opened up a new market for competing about how big your bar can be below the x-axis. How successful can you be at actually storing and sequestering carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents in the body of the building products that you make? So how do we turn this 50% issue into actually building carbon sinks? That's like the long term. How do we have a built environment that serves to store more carbon than it was responsible for emitting? Right, pretty exciting, and again, takes a little bit of mental gymnastics if it's the first time that you've been exposed to it, and we understand that. But please feel free to drop questions in the comments, and we can return to it at the end as well. So let nature cool, probably my favorite pillar, because I think it's the most humble and it is the biggest kind of biggest shout out to Mother Nature, appropriate on Earth Week. It's a recognition that no matter how good we get at capturing carbon, we are not going to be as good as all the world's forests and oceans and wetlands and that kind of thing. So what you'll see in this pillar is some of the same types of solutions that Drawdown really did some math on and said this could be a really big impact. If you don't know what Project Drawdown is, we'll actually get to it at the very end of the presentation here. But it's things like soil management. So higher quality topsoils that actually have a really high organic matter content, that's carbon. That's storing carbon. That's why it's important. Afforestation, planting trees where they didn't used to be. Reforestation, making sure that trees are where they were 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago, right? And then wetland restoration and blue carbon habitat. So this is coral reefs, this is mangrove forests. These are incredibly important ecological service providers that we need to stop thinking about just paving over a little less of and start thinking about what is our responsibility in the built environment or in major institutions to actually support, restore, heal, grow the ecological services that can be provided on our sites. So Janine Benyus is a mentor for this work and kind of a legend in the field. She's really recognized as one of the founders of the kind of conceptual approach of biomimicry. And I love this quote from her because I think that it reveals how far we have to go, but also is incredibly inspiring. What would it be like to think about a university campus that performs all the same ecological functions as the wildlands next door? So I think about, for example, on Oberlin's campus, the Living Machine, which is, you know, a closed loop wastewater treatment plant that basically ends in a beautiful wetlands, right? And I think about, so I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but there's really positive and creative kind of potential in this type of language and in this type of approach. And it is exactly where the initiative Factories as a Forest comes from. So for us as a manufacturer, factories is where we focus, but it doesn't have to be factories. It could be campuses, it could be buildings, it could be offices, it could be clinics, whatever, as forests. And the idea here is that you take an ecological baseline of the area. So you look at how does it store carbon? How does it provide habitat? How does it control soil erosion? How does it clean water? And you say, how do we design, build, and operate our facilities in a way that they will actually support the health of that ecosystem and provide those same ecological services rather than just trying to limit the damage that we do? Really, again, kind of mind-expanding exercise, I think. So the final pillar is lead the industrial re-revolution. And in contrast to the humility of let nature cool, this one really takes some boldness. This one takes some imagination and some belief that somebody's going to have to go first. And, you know, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And I love this slide because the language on here is like, oh, that's cool. And no one knows what it means. What does radical collaboration look like in an industrial re-revolution? What is a globally aligned goal even sound like, right? Is that the UN SDGs? Maybe. I mean, is that the right kind of track? Yeah, probably, right? What would it have been like if we had globally aligned goals around a pandemic response so that we'd agreed 5-10 years ago, hey, if somebody gets hit with a novel virus and it looks like it can spread really quickly, here's the protocol. Every country is going to do this to support. Every country is going to do this to, you know, to commit. Man, we'd probably be in a pretty different situation right now if we had that, right? And doesn't that require some type of revolution in the way that we interact, in the way that business works together, in the way that companies and countries even can connect? What is the role of purposeful advocacy in the kind of business world of the future? Are we only lobbying for less and less regulations so that we have an opportunity to do everything on a voluntary basis that we think needs to be done? Or are we actually lobbying for things that we think would make the world a better place and that our business can handle? Are we lobbying for things that are going to give us a competitive advantage because we are going farther on environmental or social or labor issues than most of our competitors, right? In any business, in any sector. And then what is the role of something that we would just generally call new business models, right? I mean, I love this. It's like the most innocuous term. Yeah, sure, we need a new business model. Let's just get a new one. What does that look like? What does it look like to have an inclusive business or a restorative enterprise? I'm going to show you a video here in a minute that I think is really a beautiful example of what this could mean because it represents support of a global supply chain. It represents an inclusive economic model, and it represents a waste to worth model that takes an ecologically damaging kind of phenomenon and turns it back into a valuable product. So Kelly, FYI, I'm going to play this. I'm going to let you kind of give me a heads up if it's too choppy or there's any sound issues, okay?
So the livelihoods of the people in this part of the Philippines is completely dependent upon the sea, one way or another. Danahan Bank is now one of the most degraded coral reefs in the world, with some of the highest fishing pressure. Fishers use, especially in the Philippines, use a lot of monofilament nylon nets. It's when discarded nets get into the marine environment and they just hang around. They can last for 600 plus years.
This is a really high performance engineering plastic. You know, nylon 6 is in our carpet. It's also in lots of other products that people will use every day. So we want to make sure that material can be used again. Networks is a program that takes discarded fishing nets from impoverished communities and recycles them into carpet tile.
The idea is to collect discarded fishing nets off the beaches or get them from fishers as soon as they have finished using them.
What's really important about this program is that it's not a one-shot beach cleanup for some nice pictures. It's actually about how do you institutionalize nets and ultimately other material recycling in communities in a way that benefits them in the long term.
Nauman ako nga someday moabot ra gid ang panahon nga mahurot ang tanang pupot diri sa kayunan. Kay daghan naman nga mosundog na mo.
Mga sampol nga gihatag nga gipatan-aw na mo diri. Ako nakita na dako diri kay mahimo ang maong pupot.
The product is still our product, beautiful carpet tile. It will look the same, but there'll be this story behind the material. This to me is the start of this being a restorative enterprise. We're giving back and giving opportunities that are way beyond what maybe people would think a carpet tile company could do. And this is only the beginning.
So thank you for bearing with me on that, although you're probably tired of hearing my voice. So, you know, really a hopeful business model, and I think really important that it has found a way to institutionalize itself, right? That it has found a way to be self-sustaining, that it is not only a, you know, kind of philanthropic exercise or a marketing exercise. It is really, it has actually changed the face of the fiber industry. And what is fascinating is that that supply chain, which was originally supported by Interface and some nonprofit partners, is now available to anyone who is working with the yarn supplier Aquafil that did that work. So now they provide like 50% post-consumer recycled content nylon and 50% post-industrial nylon, so 100% total recycled content to anybody who's willing to pay for it. And by the way, in the 90s, nobody even thought nylon was recyclable at all. So how amazing how far that has come. And how amazing that it also connected with a business model that, again, supports a kind of inclusive economy, provides a demand for savings and financial services where they didn't previously exist. Pretty exciting. And the other thing, just to very briefly mention, and then I'll flip over and we can start taking any other questions that are coming up, Kelly, because the other slides that I have are a little bit more wonky on the kind of designer side. So I'm not sure if that's the right crowd for this. But this is a business model. This is an approach that has actually spread to other parts of the world. So there is a company called Borreo based in Chile that does the same thing, collecting waste fishing nets from the coast there and turning it into durable plastic products, which in their case are skateboard decking and sunglasses. So I just love to tell that story, and it's one of the things that we're really proud of. So thank you for bearing with us. And then the last note on the CEU is I've been thinking a lot about stories recently and about what the history of humanity is going to look like looking back from 150 years from now. And if you think about Rachel Carson kicking off the environmental movement in a way in 1964 with Silent Spring, and you think about all the progress and all the drawbacks that we've had up until this moment, and you think about COVID-19 putting a big pause on all kinds of emissions and global economic activity, and we think about needing to be carbon neutral as a world by 2040 and carbon negative probably after that, we are living in an incredible time, and in a very high stakes time, sure, but in a really hopeful and a high potential time. And if you put yourselves in the shoes of your grandchildren's grandchildren and think about looking back at 1960 to 2040, what is that story going to be like? And what is our role and opportunity to contribute to that story in a way that's going to make us proud and give people hope? and give people a chance. So I'm gonna pause there because this is not what we want to talk about right now, and just ask if anybody has any questions or reactions. I know there's been some activity in the chat. Thank you for everybody who is answering.
Yeah, Joey, Richard Johnson's asked you a great question. Should be right there at the bottom.
Yeah, so I'll read it out for everybody. Let's say it's now fall 2021 and we all have our COVID vaccines. Yeah, right, fingers crossed. What do you think our fall 2021 new normal looks like from an environmental perspective? Does business as usual and the pre-COVID context mean the same thing in the fall 2021 as from an environmental perspective? I hope not. You know, and I think I've been thinking this recently, and you know, I can't speak for the business here. This is just a personal opinion. I think COVID-19 only goes down as a tragedy if we don't find a way to react to it productively, right? I also don't think it's as simple as saying, look, all we have to do is shut down the global economy and then like wildlife has a good time again. We're not going to do that. Right. So that's not, this isn't a way that humans and the planet thrive together. This is a everybody's scared and we're trying to do anything that we can to survive moment. And that's not where we want to be. So I don't think that the new normal in 2021 looks like what it looks like today. I think we're learning personally that the internet is a human right and should be a public utility. Because it is the way that we are all relying on sharing ideas, on learning right now, on connecting with one another. And it also, from an environmental perspective, allows us to be much more regionalized. I've presented in the last few weeks this presentation, I don't know, probably about 10 times to a total of probably about 400 people, maybe more. And, you know, that's with relatively little organization on our part. Like, we're not pushing this super, super hard. For me to do that in person, you know, the equivalent in terms of environmental impact and in terms of time, I'd be sleeping for a week right now, you know? So I think that we are learning the potential of connecting virtually, and we're also kind of reawakening to the value of being together in person because we all recognize how much we miss it. So we're going to think much more critically about how do we balance those things. And in that same reorientation of our mindset, we're going to be forced to think about the mindset that we have around the built environment or around environmental action as well. And I hope very sincerely, and I think there's real potential that this could happen, that this moment in time is going to offer the shakeup that we needed from the climate crisis to get people's attention, but that we were never going to get because the climate doesn't act on the entire world all at once, you know, in the way that this has. So I really hope that is going to happen. And Richard, I'm cheering for it with you. So you know, that's kind of the best I can do.
Hey, Joey, I've got a kind of a comment/question. I really appreciate you bringing up the embodied carbon discussion. That personally is something I'm just kind of more awakening myself to. And so seeing the 49%, 51% and recognizing, yeah, you're right. If we're going to build this many New York buildings up through 2060 per, can't remember if it's per day or how you
every month. Yeah, no, just every month.
Only every month.
Yeah.
But just the idea of that amount of embodied carbon and then those missed opportunities. And so I'm asking myself from a sustainability perspective, which this is often challenge that people in my position have, which is trying to convince the folks who are designing and value engineering buildings, because that seems to happen quite a bit. You know, have you seen any successful strategies and conversations about how to communicate the importance of that embodied carbon?
Sure. So the importance of it is the data and how it affects climate. People aren't going to be motivated by taking action on embodied carbon if they don't think that climate change is an issue. So like we can kind of move past how to communicate the importance of it. I think how to take action on it though is a much more complicated or at least previously has been much more complicated, but you've actually you forced me to go back into my slides because this is exactly what the next subject is, and it won't take me long. So let me just share with you the Materials Can partnership. So Materials Carbon Action Network, these are the founding partners. You recognize most of the names. I'm actually not going to go over them, but we're really grateful to be a part of this. Had Superior, Essex, and Kingspan join just middle of last year. Again, kind of a growing movement. And you can see there's real representation from the manufacturing community here. And then that's kind of where I'm going. So I'm going to skip this because I think we get the difference between operational and embodied carbon. But very simply, we tend to think about how much energy a light bulb uses when it's turned on. We never think about how much energy it takes to make that light bulb in the first place, right? And that is the difference between the embodied carbon, which is how much it takes to make, and the operational carbon, which is how much it uses on an hourly basis or by minute basis. The goal of this partnership, and it was only founded in the last 2 years, so it's actually come a really long way in a very short period of time, is to drive awareness, get more people thinking about it, to share, and I would even say establish and develop methodology around embodied carbon action, do some stuff, and then kind of get more people on the bus, because the more people that we can have talking about this and asking about this, the more potential it has to really take hold. So 20 plus years ago, those of you that have been in touch with the green building industry for that long will remember that LEED was getting a whole lot of credit for really driving up energy efficiency by telling people to do radical things like fix their leaks and have lights that turn off when they leave the room and not leave windows open when you're running your HVAC design, right? Which, by the way, still happens, still important to talk about. I get that. But there was a lot of low-hanging fruit out there, right? We are at that same place in the adoption curve when it comes to embodied carbon. This is really, really good news. Kirsten Ritchie, principal of Gensler San Francisco, was doing a 10,000 square foot tenant improvement fit out in the Terminal 1 of San Francisco Airport. She went through and did her kind of go-to specifications for all of these different elements in here. So wallboard, glass, carpet, steel, insulation. And then she went back over every one of those decisions and said, all right, let's say at no cost trade-off, so I'm not going to pay more for this, and at no performance trade-off, so I'm not going to give up any of the things that I need from kind of a performance durability type standpoint, right? I'm going to go back and just see if I can find alternatives at a lower carbon footprint. Now, she's an expert on this, so she could kind of like muddle through that on her own. And she found that she could get to 43% reduction, no cost trade-off, no performance trade-off. So there is there are options out there. We just need to know to look, and then we need to be able to find the data. And that is where EC3 comes in. So the Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator, which is miserable to say, so please just say EC3, is a tool that basically stacks up the carbon footprint of different product categories and different products within a category so that you can compare them. You can set overall targets for your project and say, I want to reduce carbon by 30 or 40%, which is a decent kind of a decent baseline, embodied carbon, and then it will help you track the progress that you're making based on the different specifications that you have chosen. So this tool really has only been around for 6-7 months. It's free and open source. It's hosted by the Carbon Leadership Forum at the University of Washington. You can sign up at buildingtransparency.org today. I'll let one of my colleagues drop that in the chat if you guys don't mind, and start poking around with it. And they are looking for feedback. So the more that you're interested in kind of looking at your own projects or thinking about how it might apply to your campus or to a project that you're helping to contribute to, whatever, please explore in there, and anything that you find, make sure that you let them know. There's a little feedback button on basically every page. So so please check this out, because I think it's it's a really big advancement in how possible it is to do anything different on embodied carbon with any kind of like academic rigor, right? Because what this tool is doing is taking all that publicly available EPD data that I mentioned. I'm sorry, I didn't talk about the back end of it, and plugging it into the kind of as a living database. So now you can compare based on the verified carbon footprints that are reported by manufacturers, what product is better from a carbon standpoint. And the thing that I would say in terms of taking action is, even if you're not a designer like me So you're like, I'm not comfortable using this tool in the way that I know that it has the most potential. I'm just like, my brain doesn't work this way and I'm not trained to do it. You can ask. And every supplier that you ask, what's the carbon footprint of your product? You're going to get a whole lot of very polite blank stares for right now. But I guarantee you, the more you ask, people will come back with data. People will come back with answers. They'll run it up the flagpole and somebody will give them something because it's a customer, And that's how the interface whole journey started, is a customer asks, what are you doing for the environment? We didn't have an answer. And now here we are 25 years later, right? That's the really quick and dirty version of that legend, but it is really important. And you never know the impact that you can have. So please make sure you ask. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Thanks. Richard has asked, can EC3 handle philosophical shift to materials, carbon sequestration, durable carbon?
So if EPDs are going to report that there's a negative carbon footprint, it'll be in the tool. It's that simple. So yes, whether we can use EC3 right now to track a project that overall acts as a carbon sink, I think that has more to do with the materials available and the data that we have available than it does with the tool itself. But again, the tool is very young. So help us improve it. Help the team learn what it needs to get better at. To be honest, I think it's very focused on the design and construction industry, which was totally intentional. But there's probably like some partner resources that would be really valuable in y'all's line of work or in your communities, because it's a little bit less kind of wonky and focused on working into a designer's workflow, which is, again, just something that many of us are not trained in. And so it's a little bit limited in that way.
Any other questions for Joey?
Oh, cool. You're doing a mass timber project at Rice. That's cool. Yeah, anybody from the interface team want to chime in with anything I missed or you want to talk about?
I did notice that Rick posted in the chat over there the link further up to the YouTube video of that network. So if anybody wanted to copy and paste that, and he also posted a link to the EC3 tool.
Awesome, thank you. I'm also just going to write drawdown.org in here. If you're not familiar, this is one of the books that I mentioned and one of the resources that we always offer for people. They're doing amazing work. Paul Hawken likes to say we just did the math. We basically just modeled how much of an impact different solutions would have on carbon emissions over the next 30 years. But it is remarkable what they came up with, and it's a really compelling book. It's really well written. A woman named Catherine Wilkinson was kind of the primary author, and she just did a phenomenal job. She's actually based in Atlanta, so I always like to plug her. But anything else, Kelly or Kristen?
Joey, I'd like to really express our gratitude for pinch hitting this keynote. A lot of great information. Appreciate your enthusiasm and certainly what you're doing. Ray Anderson is always one of my heroes that I talk about when I'm introducing people to the subject of sustainability and how businesses contribute. Thanks for continuing that legacy and everything that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. And like I said, we're honored to be here and just really appreciate it. So thanks everybody for your time. Please feel free to get in touch with me or anybody else on the interface team. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, enjoy your day. Happy Earth Week. Okay.
Happy Earth
Thanks
Week.
again, Joey.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great job.
Thanks.